That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, before we get into this, please do not skip this. We are going to have a Fantasy Flock Network meetup in Tampa, Florida, January 15th, 3 p.m. Completely free. Bring your friends or bring your family. Come alone. Doesn't really matter. Should be a ton of fun. On the location, everything. Thomas, can you please throw that up there? And of course, if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me on Patreon, Discord, Instagram, Twitter. Hopefully, I do not miss a message on Instagram or Twitter. And also, over there on Patreon, not only can you message me about the meetup, but at the same time, you can get access to our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. You can get into a Dynasty League with us. You can get an in-depth podcast breaking down your Dynasty team. I mean, there's access to so many different things over there. Just join a great community of guys that have a ton of fun playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. I think that should be it. Please go down there, drop a like on this video, leave a comment letting me know how stupid I am, and subscribe to the channel only if you play Dynasty Football. But I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into some Dynasty sell high wide receivers. And the first player I'm going to lead off with is a rookie, so I know naturally a lot of people are going to be very excited about him. And keep in mind, if you were following our redraft channel over the past month, over the end of the season, I was coming through and I was saying that he was a must-start player every single week based on the volume that he was getting in his offense. But I want to stand by the fact that I don't necessarily think the volume that was going in his direction was based on the talent. I think it was more so based on the situation that he was in, and you were going to have a ton of things changing this upcoming year. But this is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Detroit Lions. Now, a big thing is, if we're going to go through and look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, I first have to give a little disclaimer. I mean, if we're going to be looking at, say, the last 5 weeks of the season, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a top 5 wide receiver on a points per game basis. That's ridiculous. That's the late season rookie breakout that you want to see. And you're not going to be seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown having the same price tag that A.J. Brown did with his breakout at the end of his own rookie season. And the reason for that is a large part of the Dynasty community, they're not going to be buying in to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, it's not that DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown level ascension where all of a sudden after their rookie seasons, they're going to be going in the middle of the second round of Dynasty startups. No, I mean, you can go through, you can look at some of those Patreon Dynasty mock drafts that we did earlier on this channel just about a week ago. And you can see Amon-Ra St. Brown, no, he's falling down. He's more so going as that low-end wide receiver too. And even at that price point, I think I'm going to be looking to sell. Now, if you're going over and looking at the profile of Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know a lot of people probably expect me to begin talking about the draft capital. You know, I'm a draft capital snob, and looking at someone like Elijah Mitchell, maybe I think that it's a decent idea to move on from him based on the team investment. I'm not going to have that take with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I actually think this is a wide receiver that the draft capital doesn't matter at all. And if y'all remember this, I mean, when we went through and we talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown in our 2021 Dynasty Patreon rookie draft guide, I mean, what we are looking at with the draft capital at the receiver position is just the entire Dynasty community misunderstanding what team investment meant for different wide receivers in the NFL draft. Whereas if you were historically going through and looking and you're seeing that Henry Ruggs goes as the first wide receiver in the 2020 draft, you see that Will Fuller goes very early in his own draft class. I mean, time and time again, you see that these field stretching wide receivers that demonstrate the elite speed at the NFL Combine, I mean, go back to being John Ross and a top 10 pick in that 2017 draft class, those players are always going to be going ahead of the slot wide receivers that may be significantly better draft assets. And the reason for this is one of those players that has the elite level speed to win on the outside, they're going to be able to come through and they're going to be able to adjust how opponents have to go through and scheme against their own offense, where Henry Ruggs, he's not going to be great from a fantasy football standpoint because Henry Ruggs is never going to command volume in that offense, but just his presence on the field is going to have to keep two safeties back. And that's why the Raiders are going out there and taking him as the first wide receiver off the board ahead of CeeDee Lamb, ahead of Jerry Jeudy. If you ask John Gruden at the time of that selection, no, he's not thinking that Henry Ruggs is going to have more fantasy points than CeeDee Lamb year one. Nobody's thinking that. And it's very similar to what you actually see with slot wide receivers as well. The hierarchy on how NFL teams go through and value these players are A, guys that can stretch the field and change opposing defenses. B, wide receivers that can win on the outside, one-on-one coverage. And lastly, the least valuable receiver from an NFL standpoint is actually going to be the slot wide receiver that really is more so running routes underneath and not necessarily creating separation on his own, and just kind of the guy that's more so being schemed into the offense. So with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I don't care that he got selected in the 4th round of this past NFL draft class. That player type can always be more valuable in fantasy than it is for the NFL. And of course, I'm not coming out here and saying to sell Amon-Ra St. Brown because he's not going to be great from an NFL standpoint. That doesn't really matter. We're talking fantasy here. You know, I'm always the first person to say that your real life NFL takes don't matter. What matters more so is just the fantasy production. We play a fake game. Fantasy is in the name of the game. And here with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think that if you're looking at this production, it's skewed because they had no other option. They had no option to go to a player on the outside. They had no option to go to a field stretching guy. They did not even have TJ Hawkinson or Deandre Swift. This is a big thing that I want to discuss this year. And that's why I was going through and I was saying the second TJ Hawkinson hits the IR, the second that Deandre Swift is ruled out, Amon-Ra St. Brown becomes a must-start wide receiver. I mean, if you're looking at the Detroit Lions passing stats this year, hideous. Now, of course, yeah, Jared Goff, so you're not necessarily assuming that a lot of wide receivers are going to go out there and be productive in the first place. It's impressive if any wide receiver is able to go out there and be productive, but nonetheless, if you're looking at the names at the top of this list, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown leading this team in receiving yards his rookie season. Beyond that, you have a tight end in TJ Hawkinson who didn't play at the end of the year, and that's when, if you look at the game log for Amon-Ra St. Brown, he began to get double-digit targets. That's when he began to be hyper-productive. You have Khalif Raymond. I don't think anybody's going to make an argument that he's anything more than just a jag wide receiver that is a practice squad level player. I mean, Deandre Swift, who missed the end of the season as well, when you had the ascension for Amon-Ra St. Brown, Quintus Cephas. I mean, Kadarius Hodge is the 3rd best receiver on this list. It was more so just based on the lack of weapons to get the ball to in Detroit. The removal of TJ Hawkinson and Deandre Swift at the end of the year made it where they had no other option but to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And because he wasn't the wide receiver winning one-on-one on the outside, because he wasn't the wide receiver that was stretching the field, I mean, having to keep 2 safeties back, opposing defenses, they're fine letting Amon-Ra St. Brown just get targeted consistently over the middle of the field, closer to the line of scrimmage, because those aren't the efficient plays that the defense has to guard against. So, I mean, going and projecting this offense going forward, you are going to have TJ Hawkinson coming back next year. TJ Hawkinson presumably will lead this team in targets. B, Deandre Swift should be fully healthy as well. Deandre Swift, I know it's stupid to say this. I mean, a running back hurting a wide receiver, but if you're looking at how Deandre Swift operates in this offense, he's going to be at the top of the team as well in the targets that he is getting on a per game basis. And with Amon-Ra St. Brown being that slower slot wide receiver, they're actually going to get targeted with a similar average at the target. Yes, Amon-Ra St. Brown will definitely be higher, but you get the point. This isn't necessarily a receiver like Kenny Golladay that is just going out there and getting the ball 18 yards downfield every single time. And also, what is very important here is there is a massive free agent class at the receiver position this offseason. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Mason, what free agent is ever going to want to go sign with Detroit? And that is a fair point. But there's also something else happening here. The Detroit Lions are in a position to take a great receiver in this year's draft class. We know that this draft class, not great for quarterbacks. It's going to be hard for Detroit to go out there and find their franchise guy in this class. But where they are strong at is the receiver position. Now, I would be surprised if Detroit decides to take someone in the top 3 of the NFL draft. That's not going to be happening. They're not taking Treylon Burks. They're not taking Garrett Wilson there. But where they could easily go is in the end of the first when they have the Los Angeles Rams first-round pick with the trade that they had with Matthew Stafford. Or, keep in mind, they have the first pick in the second round, which is essentially a late first. So they have 2 strong points where they can go through and they can attack the wide receiver position. Clearly, clearly one of their biggest team needs. I honestly think this is, a team with a decent offensive line. They don't have a lot of holes there. I'd imagine that they're a favorite to get a receiver, maybe not with their first pick. Maybe they trade back from that first pick. We don't necessarily know what to expect, but they have a ton of assets to go out there and address the receiver position in the NFL draft. I truly do think Amon-Ra St. Brown was a factor of his situation rather than his talent this season. And I think if increased target competition comes in the way of TJ Hawkinson, Deandre Swift, which their removal from the offense, if you just go through, and Thomas, please put the stats right here, please put the game logs, you can draw exactly when Hawkinson and Swift started to miss and exactly when you had the Amon-Ra St. Brown ascension. If you add those two players back in and at the same time, then you go and grab a top wide receiver in the NFL draft, I think it's not good news for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I personally would be looking to sell, and very similar, a wide receiver in Hunter Renfrow. We said this the second TJ Hawkinson went out. We said it the second that Darren Waller went out. Both players became must-start options for you because there were just massive target voids over the middle of the field. And very similar to the Detroit Lions, I think that you could see the Las Vegas Raiders going out there and addressing the wide receiver position. Even if they decided not to address the wide receiver position this year, you can clearly see when the breakout happened. Darren Waller left that Thanksgiving game early with his own injury. That was the full-on breakout from Hunter Renfrow. And since then, Hunter Renfrow was coming out crushing as a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And if you look at the target volume, it's clear that Hunter Renfrow was able to get that uptick because of Darren Waller, not because of Henry Ruggs. I know a lot of people are going to assume that Hunter Renfrow's emergence was because the departure of Henry Ruggs, which intuitively would make sense. You go to submit your starting lineup and you see Henry Ruggs, wide receiver, Hunter Renfrow, wide receiver. But if you actually look at the area of the field where each wide receiver gets targeted and actually the impact that they have on opponents, I kind of want to say that the departure of Darren Waller, who was close to 9 targets a game, mattered way more for the success of Hunter Renfrow than Henry Ruggs leaving the offense, who is closer to 4 targets a game. So you will get Darren Waller back next year. Also, Las Vegas is actually probably going to be an appealing free agent destination where maybe they go out and they sign someone like Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe they go and pursue someone like Chris Goddard. Unlikely. Maybe they get Allen Robinson. There's so many free agents this offseason that it's a possibility for them to view the room and saying, okay, Bryan Edwards, clearly a bust. Clearly at the same time, when we have no Henry Ruggs, we're going to have to go fill a hole. And you're also going to get Darren Waller back. So there's a strong possibility that with the Las Vegas Raiders, that they go out there and they sign a receiver in this free agent class, or they go out and draft someone this year as well. And I want to stand by the fact that with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Hunter Renfrow, they both became must-start options in PPR formats at the end of the year, but not based on their talent. It was based on the loss of dominant tight ends in their offenses, as well as an extremely thin wide receiver room. So I'm actually going to be looking to sell both guys. They look identical to me. If you look at their profiles, they're both slow slot wide receivers that can soak up a decent amount of volume, that are a lot more valuable for your fantasy team than they are in the real life NFL. And those are usually the guys that I'm going out there and targeting. However, when they're coming off a high point based on just cheap volume, I would actually prefer to go through and sell. And now our next receiver is going to be someone that I hate to bring up because I love a player in his offense. I love his quarterback. Let's talk about Brandon Ayuk here. Now, with Brandon Ayuk, y'all know nobody likes Trey Lance more than I do. I am a Trey Lance fanboy, and Ayuk and Trey Lance, they just won me $1,000 this past weekend. We went through and had a heavy prop bet on the over on both players once Trey Lance was named the starter. However, I want to stand by this. If you were looking at Brandon Ayuk, I think this is going to be a very similar situation to what you actually have in Philadelphia this season, where if we're going through and we're looking at a points per game basis based on, I have the Flock 3 Patreon Dynasty League pulled up, and based on this league, Jalen Hurts on a points per game basis was the quarterback 6 on a points per game basis, only behind Mahomes, Kyler, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, and Josh Allen. However, if we were to go through and if we were to look at his passing game options, they weren't anything close to this. If you're looking at Dallas Goddard in a tight end premium format, he averages 12.5 points a game. If you're looking at Devonta Smith, he averages 11. Outside of that, there was not another player on the Philadelphia Eagles that was able to eclipse double-digit fantasy points. Now, if we're going through and looking at where Devonta Smith, Dallas Goddard stacked up at their own positions, I mean, it's a little embarrassing for what you had. And keep in mind, this is all in the context of Jalen Hurts being a mid-quarterback one in fantasy. Like, let's go over look at Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith, his rookie season. Oh, God, this is bad. We even have to expand the sample a little bit here to be able to go through and find them. But Devonta Smith was the wide receiver 39 on a points per game basis behind guys like Devontae Parker, Darnell Mooney, Christian Kirk. Just not a good look. And it's not because Devonta Smith wasn't a very talented quarterback. The issue was with Jalen Hurts. He simply wasn't getting to 200 passing yards in the majority of games. He was getting there based on his rushing production. So, his wide receiver 1 ended up being a wide receiver 4 in fantasy. And if you go over and you look at a very similar thing at the tight end position with Dallas Goddard, someone I loved coming into the season based on the assumption you were going to have no Zach Ertz the entire year. Of course, Zach Ertz sticking around a little bit hurt us at the beginning of the year with Dallas Goddard. But Goddard was a low-end tight end 1. He was the tight end 10 on a points per game basis in a tight end premium format. So to go through and look at this, it's hard to see that there's going to be a lot of passing volume with these run-first quarterbacks. With Trey Lance, I am a massive fan, but I truly do think it's going to be a very similar situation to what you had with Jalen Hurts historically, where you're going to get Trey Lance, who we've already seen it. He's going out there, he's running the ball. He is averaging over 12 carries a game in his 2 starts right now, and I get it. It's a very small sample. I do want to believe that Trey Lance can grow as a passer a ton. Nobody likes Trey Lance more than I do, but the issue is if you're going through and looking at the personnel on this team, they also have George Kittle, and not only do they have Kittle, but they have Debo Samuel as well. I think Debo Samuel may actually be the wide receiver that's better to put on this list because based on what I've personally seen from Trey Lance, he's willing to take those deep shots, but he's not really checking the ball down out of the backfield that often, and instead he's willing to run the ball. Very similar to what we talk about with other rushing quarterbacks like Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's not necessarily going to be dumping it off 9-10 times a game to Alvin Kamara to the backfield because he has the ability to go through and run if the pocket collapses. Very similar with Trey Lance here, where maybe the better call actually is Debo Samuel, because if you're looking at Debo Samuel, I know he was hyper productive this season. Debo Samuel was a wide receiver that put all the injuries aside he's been dealing with essentially since he was in high school. And he came out and he was a league-winning wide receiver where if you're looking at the points per game, he was only behind Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams in points per game this year at the receiver position. Now, with Debo, it's a little bit of an interesting case in that he was more so used as a running back. And I know this is a popular take now, but keep in mind, we were saying this coming into the year because if you looked at the average depth of target historically for Debo Samuel, he's actually down there lower than the majority of running backs. He is by far and away, and it's a wide margin. Now, keep in mind, his usage was different at the beginning of this season when they weren't using Brandon Ayuk as that prototypical ex-alpha wide receiver in the offense, and instead they placed Debo Samuel into that role. But when Kyle Shanahan transitioned Debo Samuel back to his usual role at the end of the year, you did see that average depth of target take a sharp fall off. And here with Debo, this is someone that was mainly fueled off of touchdown efficiency. He had 12 touchdowns through the first 16 weeks this season, and 7 of those being rushing touchdowns. Now, I can almost guarantee you that Debo Samuel will never have another season with 7 rushing touchdowns with Trey Lance at the quarterback position, who will be vulturing those at the goal line. So knowing that Trey Lance is also probably not going to be checking the ball down at the line of scrimmage more often than Jimmy Garoppolo was, and I doubt that they continue to give, Debo Samuel, over the past 6 weeks, I don't have week 17 pulled up, but from weeks 10 through 16, you're looking at 5, 8, 6, 8, 6, 5 carries. The majority of those weeks, he had more carries than he had targets. There's no way in hell that continues. And if it does continue, Trey Lance is not going to be a good thing for that because with Lance, he's going to be taking a lot of those rushing touchdowns at the goal line. And I think that should be it for this video. So we're going to include Debo Samuel instead of Brandon Ayuk because you can get a much better return for Debo as well. But I really hope that y'all enjoyed this video. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, letting me know why I am so stupid. Subscribe to the channel as well, only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And I think that should be it. Hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.